Hello, and welcome back to another episode of It Depends, Lessons in Technology Leadership. I, as always, am your host, Kevin Goldsmith. I am a CTO. I've been a Director of Engineering, VP of Engineering, Engineering Manager, and developer for over 30 years in the technology industry. And I wrote a book. The book is called It Depends, Writing on Technology Leadership 2012 to 2022. And in this podcast, we include chapters of the audiobook. We serialize the audiobook. And we do that every other week. And on the alternate weeks, we have a newsletter, and the newsletter includes the text of the book, but that is out of order relative to the podcast. So if you subscribe to both, you get different things every week. For those of you that have filled out the survey, thank you very much. For those of you that haven't, would appreciate if you would. It's linked in the show notes. It's also linked from itdependsbook.net, where you can find all the information about the book, links to this podcast, links to the newsletter, and also ways to contact me, all sorts of other stuff, and a link to the survey. We are getting close to the end of the book. We're on chapter 30 this episode, so only 6 chapters left. Because of the suggestions I've gotten from you already, I have some ideas of where I'm going next after we complete this book, and also some special episodes at the end to add in and answer some of the questions you've had and other things that have come through the survey. So more ideas, really appreciate them. Thank you very much. This chapter that we're going to cover this episode is called A Diversity Challenge. Tech Startups Have a Great Opportunity. And the timing of this relative to what's going on in the industry is not deliberate. I included the same chapter actually in the last newsletter because of things going on in the industry. And that is because of large companies removing their DEI programs very publicly in response to the current politics. When I wrote this chapter, though, it was a few years ago, and at that time, all these companies were talking about their DEI programs and increasing diversity in tech and building more diverse technology teams. And so it's a weird chapter to talk about, because in the chapter, I talk about how startups can actually do a better job of it than big companies. But now a lot of big companies aren't even trying. In fact, they're just saying we're not even going to bother. I think in a lot of cases, they weren't really bothering at all. They were trying to make it seem like they cared, and they didn't really do anything substantive. But the chapter still resonates, I think, especially now, because if large companies are walking away from even pretending to care about diversity, this is a huge opportunity for startups. I speak from experience, and in the next episode, we're going to talk about specifically how we approached increasing diversity in the technology team at Avo, because that is a very serious and important thing for me. I may be a cis, white, hetero male, but I care about diversity in tech. And as you've heard, I've been in tech a long time. I've worked in plenty of not diverse companies. And I've also been lucky enough to work in some very diverse companies. I've made a point in companies where I am in leadership to increase diversity. And the reason is not because it's right, because it is, but also because, honestly, diverse teams do better jobs. They build better products, and people are happier in diverse company with a multitude of opinions. And some of the least functional, most toxic companies I've worked for were the ones that were the least diverse and rampant with bias, success bias, similarity bias. I cover a lot of biases in the next chapter because I'm talking about hiring. But companies that have addressed that and put an effort towards that, I've worked in, they work, and that diversity is a superpower. So if you're thinking about your startup and you're trying to build, let's say, a consumer product, meaning you're hoping your products can be used by a lot of different people, having a diverse team helps you understand your customers better. Some of the worst products that were built were these products that were built very clearly for a very narrow group of people, but very narrow group of technology people and solving their problem. And those companies fail because they were building a product for a very narrow group of people. If you're trying to build consumer products, even if you're trying to build B2B products, but you're expecting a diverse group of people to buy it, having a diverse team is going to help you at all levels. So that's why this is important. I don't just say it because I'm virtue signaling. I say it because I care, because I'm an ally, but I also say it because it's good business. It really is. You always hear the same studies quoted, the Harvard study or whatever, that show that diverse teams outperform non-diverse teams. But I'm talking from lived experience in multiple companies where I've seen it work better. And I've seen people be happier in those kind of teams and enjoy their jobs more. When I originally wrote this a few years ago, it struck me because I mentor a lot of folks from underrepresented groups. That's one of the things I try to do to help. And what I would hear from them is that they'd end up at these large companies and be the only one that looked like them or that came from a similar background as them. And it made it really hard for them to feel like they belonged. It led to a lot of imposter syndrome. It led to a lot of being very self-conscious. It also led to things like you've heard about coming into a conference room for a meeting and somebody assuming you're there to clear out the trash or things like that. That absolutely happens. And I would hear about it from the people I mentor. And it was depressing, but it also made me realize as a startup with a smaller number of people, you have the law of small numbers that you can leverage. You can hire a few people and very visibly increase presence, increase the sense of I am not the only person. I am part of a broader community and a broader community of lots of different kinds of people, not just I am the only one of my kind and everyone else is the same. And so that was what I wanted to talk about because I thought at the time, if we startups, because I've been at startups now for a long time, if we startups wanted to drive here, we could actually help the entire industry because we could create much more diverse companies. And when folks moved on from our companies and let's say they went to bigger companies, they wouldn't feel that same sense of otherness. Potentially, they would feel more confident. They would have years of professional experience. I thought that might be a thing that we as startups not only could do for ourselves, but we could actually do for the industry as a whole. Now, in the current environment, I think a lot more about we as startups, the big companies are all walking away from it because they want government contracts or they're worried about backlash for having diversity and inclusion programs, which doesn't make any sense to me. Again, beyond the fact that they never really cared about it and they were never serious about it. That's the only thing I can think about in regards to this. But now I come back to us again as startups and think about, well, okay, this is now not just a thing we should do to make the industry and our own companies better, but this is now actually an opportunity for us. So if I was going to write this today, I would say not only this is a great opportunity for us to improve the industry, but this is an opportunity for us to hire great people away from those big companies. And I saw this, by the way, even when we were hiring. I talked specifically, we partnered with two great programs, the Ada Developer Academy and the Apprenti program, as a way of bringing in new to career folks. But as a consequence, especially as our teams became more diverse, we also started to attract people from more traditional kind of tech backgrounds and more traditional tech experience, more experienced folks who just wanted to work at a company that welcomed them and that didn't make them feel like other. Now, I think with big companies laying off, big companies very visibly, very vocally stepping away from any pretense of caring about diversity, now I think we have a massive opportunity. Because if we in startups are that voice for diversity, for building diverse teams, for building diverse companies, I think that we in startups not only can attract the best new to career talent, but also a lot more very senior people. So if your startup is looking to attract senior developers and junior developers, being diverse, not just talking about it, but actually building diverse and inclusive teams is going to make you an easy choice for those skilled people at these bigger companies that are becoming disenchanted because their company culture has gone in a completely unexpected direction. They're going to be looking for another opportunity. If your company can be known as a place that welcomes them, they'll be looking at you as a place to work. I think it's even more important now. It was important then, and I felt strongly about it then. I feel even more strongly about it now. We would be remiss to not take advantage of this opportunity now that we have it. Short chapter, very simple idea. Take advantage of the law of small numbers. But you can look at this as also just a call around company culture and anything you want to bring in a startup. It's a lot easier than a big company because of that law of small numbers. There's a lot of advantages we have as small or mid-sized companies, startups, that we can use to build better companies, to build better products by taking advantage of that kind of law of small numbers, meaning we can attract better candidates, we can address smaller market niches, all those kinds of things. And the companies I know that I am most excited about, and I think a lot of other people are as well, is the companies that try to do well by doing good. By not only building a good product, but also trying to build a company that people want to work for. And that is what a lot of people are looking for. And if your company is serious about that, that's an unfair advantage you have for attracting these people. Because a lot of companies give it lip service and don't do anything about it. They say lots of stuff, but they don't do it. So this is your opportunity. This is a call to those of you like me who are at smaller companies who care about building a better industry, but also care about building better products and more effective teams, to think about how you hire, think about what you can do to increase the range of voices and the range of different backgrounds in your teams to build better products for your customers. So now I give you chapter 30 of It Depends, a diversity challenge. Tech startups have a great opportunity. A diversity challenge. Tech startups have a great opportunity. Originally published on May 16, 2017. For decades, we've been complaining about the lack of diversity in the technology industry. We've worked on the pipeline problem. We've worked on reducing bias in hiring. We've worked on the sourcing problem. We've worked on the retention problem. The net result thus far is that we've barely moved the needle. Most of the companies that are investing in diversity programs are large companies. For them, their continuing lack of diversity is a public embarrassment. At scale, though, it is a far more difficult challenge for a company like Google, Microsoft, or Facebook to reach any percentage of the tech workforce that mirrors their customer base. The numbers are too large to move the needle. It's far easier for startups. A critical part of building an inclusive culture that supports diversity is reducing otherness. Inclusiveness is also much harder to do in a large company. If Google hired 1,000 developers of color across all their offices, those individuals might never encounter another person like themselves on a daily or weekly basis. They may still be the only person of color their peers see at work. They will be spread too thinly across the population. Large technology companies should still work consistently to improve their diversity, but startups are much better suited to solve the diversity problem for the industry as a whole. A startup with a development team of 10 with 4 women has a ratio of 40% female developers. Any woman who interviews with the company will see that they are welcome. Any man interviewing will understand that they will be joining a company that takes diversity seriously and will be expected to conduct themselves appropriately. This would be the same for any other underrepresented group. If the company is serious about building a diverse workforce, they will find it easier to continue to be diverse as they grow. Bringing in a diverse workforce at the early stages of a company will also mean leadership opportunities for those employees as the company grows. It will help address the lack of diversity in industry leadership, which further helps build minority representation. It will also eventually mean more startups created by underrepresented industry groups, which will continue to fuel diversity in the industry. Some of these startups may be acquired, putting their leadership into the leadership of other companies, increasing diversity in them. Most surveys show that startup founders' most significant challenge is hiring development talent. Meanwhile, there are ever larger numbers of coding schools and boot camps graduating eager junior developers willing to work hard and coming from largely underrepresented populations in the industry. Many experienced minority developers at larger companies would be interested in an environment that allows them to be themselves. Unfortunately, most startups neglect the critical cultural aspects of building their company as they chase product market fit, funding, or customers. Many haven't considered that building a diverse company will help them find the right product for mainstream audiences, that sources of capital increasingly value diversity in their funding decisions, and that diverse teams build better products that attract more customers. So I call on my fellow startup CTOs and CEOs to take on this challenge. If we succeed, we will not only build a better industry, but also create better companies for our shareholders, employees, and ourselves. I hope that chapter, again, simple idea, but one I wanted to share, one that I wanted to elaborate on a little bit. As I said, again, next episode, we'll talk about, okay, well, let's say you want to build a more diverse team. How do you go about it? I will talk about how we did that at Avo. We were incredibly serious about it, very dedicated to it. We also had the benefit of being a scaling company, so we were hiring a lot, made it a lot easier. It worked exceptionally well for us. And I have taken the things that we did and used them at every other company to increase diversity in the technology organization. Because to be honest, in almost every company I've joined, we're usually the worst part of the company when you look at diversity, because it's a challenge in the industry. Even if you are serious about it, it's difficult. But if you don't actually put energy into it, you're not going to end up with a diverse team. You actually have to focus on it. You have to be serious about it. And for that reason, a lot of companies, even with leadership that is not against it or certainly supportive of it, but it's not their focus, or they're not willing to put extra energy into it, to work a little bit harder for it, those companies end up with a significant lack of diversity, not because they're trying to, but because they're not trying not to. If you think this is important, and again, I think it's important, not just because I think it's important because I've seen it build better products and happier teams, more employee loyalty. It's important stuff. And so that's why I care about it. And in every company I'm in, we do put more energy into it and into building diverse teams, just to make sure we're not just settling for status quo. Next week, a new newsletter. I'll see you back on this podcast in 2 weeks. And then again, the next episode, talking about hiring and how to build more diversity in your technology organization. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.